Hello everyone, and welcome to this special webinar hosted by the Older Women's Network as part of Anti-Poverty Week. It's an especially timely conversation given the recent federal budget, which left many women, older women and younger women, feeling excluded, and at a time when we know that older women are increasingly the most vulnerable when it comes to homelessness. My name is Caroline Baum, and I'm the ambassador for the Older Women's Network in New South Wales. And this is my first chance to have a conversation with those of you who are members in this role, and also to welcome those of you who are not members yet. Before we begin, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we find ourselves wherever we are today. I am on Dharawal country of the Wadi Wadi people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I hope that you're going to take this opportunity to comment on what resilience means in your lives and what has got you through isolation and lockdown, the fear or the reality of catching the virus, separation from family, loss of work, income, or whatever your struggle has been on the OWN Facebook page. And also, I just want to give a very special shout out today to those of you who are not feeling resilient at the moment, because no matter what the reason is, it's a work in progress. And I think all of our speakers today will acknowledge that. Please feel free to post questions during our conversation at any time. Just go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and don't wait until the end. We're going to leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions, but you can post them at any point and we'll try and respond and aggregate them as we go. Now, we've got an extraordinary panel of women here today to talk about what resilience means to them and to the people that they work with in the current climate. And I'm going to keep their biographies pretty short so that we can spend most of our time on our discussion. Ronnie Khan is the founder and CEO of OzHarvest, the not-for-profit food rescue organization that feeds those in need around the country. She is also a passionate anti-food waste activist. She has a new book out, which I just happen to have here. It's called A Repurposed Life, and which gives you some idea of the stamina, energy, and relentless optimism that Ronni embodies. But she has, like any of us, had her stumbles and had to pick herself up. Dr. Elizabeth Mcintyre is a Worimi and Wonnarua woman whose country spans Port Stephens, the Great Mile Lakes, and the Hunter Valley. So basically some of the most beautiful country in the state. She is a doctor of social work and criminology and an accredited mental health social worker and the Aboriginal official visitor of prisons statewide with the New South Wales Inspector of Custodial Services and a member of the New South Wales Mental Health Review Tribunal. Elaine Payton is a writer, conceptual theatre director, and a performance artist, or performer rather, at the intersection of art and mental health. When we met at a festival a couple of years ago, I was really struck by her humour and her dignity, talking about her experience of homelessness, trying to balance daily uncertainty with maintaining a creative life. Now that is one hell of a juggle. And finally, Bev Baker is a survivor of domestic violence who escaped an abusive marriage and raised 3 girls as a single mother and has had a varied career within the union movement, as well as working for Macquarie Bank on their corporate social responsibility program and as president of the New South Wales Parents and Children's Federation. She is the chair of the Older Women's Network in New South Wales. So a very warm welcome to all of you on the panel and a very warm welcome to all of you watching today. There are so many ways that we can tackle this subject, but I just want to start maybe personally with a couple of you. I think that it's very clear that we learn by example. And so I wondered whether perhaps a couple of you could talk a little bit about women in your lives when you were growing up who demonstrated resilience, because I'm thinking actually it occurs on page 20 of your book, Ronnie. You talk about the extraordinary moment when your mother has to demonstrate resilience all of a sudden out of the blue.
Yeah. Thank you so much, first of all. What a beautiful panel to be on. I'm really honored to meet all of you gorgeous women and to be talking to Own today. I too would like to just acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my deep respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Yeah, the role modeling I had was absolutely subliminal, but my mother was not working at the time. I was the third child, and my father overnight had an accident and they didn't know if he'd survived the week, not to mention what kind of life he'd have afterwards. And through the next 2 years when my dad was in hospital, I do not recall a day. I was 6, 7, and I do not recall a day that my mother didn't smile, didn't just make the best of every situation. And her resilience, focus was extraordinary. And I think you cannot not be imbibe some of that genetic positivity, which I believe is where some of my energy has come from. And seeing it firsthand and just knowing you make the best of every situation. And that meant that she had to overnight find work and support 3 children in a society, you know, that 70 years ago, 80 years ago wasn't so supportive of women working.
It's fascinating that she did that, Ronnie, by baking 250 cakes a week. So she was feeding people and you've ended up feeding people. I find that part of the story also very intriguing. Bev, I want to come to you because when we were talking earlier this week, you told me that you didn't just grow up with your mother and your grandmother in the house, but also your great-grandmother. So you had several generations in the house. And I think your grandmother was quite important in terms of resilience, wasn't she?
Look, absolutely. I was raised by 3 amazing women until I was 3 years old. And I thought that women ruled the planet. I mean, my grandmother was head of the house and my grandfather, who I loved and absolutely adored, did as he was told. And she would say, you know, Pop, get this, Pop, get that, and Pop would go and do it. She and my mother got on really, really well. And my great-grandmother was in that house. So I was the absolutely the treasured being within that home. And I thought that was the way of the world. It wasn't until my sister was born and my father moved us out of that household into his house that I realised that there was another view of girls, of women, of the importance of speech, of being engaged in your community. And it was a view I did not warm to. And it was really my grandmother, as a 3-year-old, I clearly remember the agony I felt. My mother tells me I blame my little sister for it. I kept hiding her in the linen press and telling her that she'd run away from home so I could go back to the house in which I was happy. But my grandmother said to me, this too will pass. Do not let this change you. This will pass. And I think that became really my mantra. It doesn't really matter what happens. This will pass. If it doesn't kill you, it will make you stronger. If it doesn't grind you down, you will rise a stronger person from it. But on top of that is the knowledge that things can grind you down. My grandmother my grandfather lost his job because of the closing of a factory. He was too old to be re-employed. My grandmother took up sewing sequins, hand sewing sequins onto carnival costumes and contortionist outfits. So there were always people in and around the house. My mum had lots of help around the home. They shared the cooking. There was a whole range of things that taught me that together we are stronger than we are alone. And I think those things have stood me in really, really good stead and have been a driving force in everything I've tried to do in my life.
Liz, what about you? Because I saw you nodding several times during that. You're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you
Right
go.
now. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, look, what a great thrill to be with everybody today. Thank you, Carolyn, for the lovely introduction. Honour to be with such beautiful women on this panel today. Firstly, wherever we are today, physically or virtually, you know, we acknowledge the First Nations peoples and the spirits of their ancestors on whose lands we live and we work, and the continuation of the cultural, spiritual and educational practices. And we salute their elders through the thousands of generations. Look, similar to Ronnie, my mother, it has for sure, it's my mother and my grandmothers that I remember the strength and the courage and the resilience of these women. And no wonder it has been passed down through to me, to my cousins, and then on to my daughter, you know, as well, and her children. It's just running all through us. So my mother was a widow at 39, having to raise 5 children. Again, similarly, just very quickly, my father passed away from heart disease, undiagnosed. So here was mum having to raise 5 children from age of 2 until 18. So that was just something she did in her stride. Got herself a job, cleaned houses. In those days, there was a single parent's pension that she could claim, but, you know, she worked. Then my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, mum's mum, she raised her 3 children by building bush huts, and that as she went through the bush in the years of the Depression. Also, that would be because she was running and keeping her children safe, being a very dark-skinned Aboriginal woman, married to a white man who was away working. All these things have come out that we've to put it all together. She was also one crack of a shot. She could shoot a rabbit between the eyes. She fed her family through hunting. She was the best fisherwoman I'd ever known, and we'll never know anyone better than that. Then on my dad's side, my other grandmother, she was a widow in her 40. She raised 6 children. So, and then raise grandsons as well later on. And that's what I'm actually doing now. I have a grandson living with me. So that's wow, where it all came from. So, you know, very similar stories.
There's some resilience in those genes. Elaine, what about you briefly?
Ooh, that's a bit challenging for me, this question.
Oh, well, you don't have to answer this one.
No, I will, because it's a bit different. And I sort of been listening to everyone else's stories of their mothers and grandmothers. I've just been reflecting. My mother became an alcoholic, so I yes, not sharing quite these stories. However, what she did give me was she had a sense of style. She always created beautiful homes. She was fun. But the interesting thing is that when my parents divorced, because unfortunately my father also had mental health issues going on, and she ended up going out, and she worked as companions to all sorts of people, including the Duchess of Argyll, who was quite infamous person. So she ended up being interviewed on the Daily Mail and all this kind of thing. And my parents were divorced. She sent me a little cassette of an interview that was done on the BBC radio, where she actually lied and said that when we were teenagers, our father had died. And she didn't warn me. So, and luckily I had a friend with me. And I said, should we just rerun the tape? And I never talked to her about it because things were always pretty tricky. But the shame of being a divorcee, and she was a Catholic as well. And looking back, she was incredibly resilient because she used her sort of domestic skills to then go out and work for all these extraordinary people. She did have a very venturous spirit. She had a great sense of humour, and she'd been through the war.
Well, that says a lot.
That really affected her. She often would tell me she was absolutely terrified. She was in boarding school when war broke out. Her family lived in Cardiff. There was a blitz. She was absolutely terrified. And I think, generally speaking, well, certainly I was growing up in Wales, and they'd all been through the war, the husbands and the wives, and I think that affected everything. So even if it gave them a sort of resilience, they were recovering from that, and a lot of them using alcohol.
Well, I think, we'll possibly come back to that theme of sort of resilience and trauma and the balance between them later on in this conversation. But it's fascinating that so many of you can relate to having women in your lives who used their domestic skills, whether it was sewing or cooking, to kind of give them an opportunity that they could leverage into a better life for their families. Ronnie, I want to ask you something. A lot of community workers have been telling me that as a result of JobSeeker, many families are telling them that they are eating better than they could before because the JobSeeker rate is higher at the moment, or it has been. But at the same time, organizations like your charity are seeing huge increases in demand for help, for food. So what are you hearing and what are you seeing about your clients and what's happened during this strange time in terms of demand?
Yeah, look, there's absolutely no doubt that JobSeeker has helped somewhat. There's not even any doubt, and it's eased a little bit of the pressure. We have about 1 million people who are a new cohort of people that's on top of the 5 million that our research tells us and our facts tell us need food relief at some point through a year. There's 1 million more now who've never needed food before, who don't even know how to access it, who've never needed to go to a charity, who through losing their jobs or through whatever's happened in this last 6 months have now found themselves in a very different position. And that is real. And our charities, so some charities had to close during this period because they were manned by elder volunteers or just couldn't gear themselves up to the safety precautions they needed to service their people. And other charities are telling us, so the existing charities could take another 50% over the demand that we are currently filling. So there's at least a 46% uplift on need. And there's the 72% of new people who have never needed to access food before. And so places like our free hamper hubs, our free supermarket, that's where we're seeing this new cohort. International students, casual workers who lost their jobs and are not on JobKeeper or JobSeeker. But those on JobKeeper, first of all, the fear is that has gone down as of the 29th of September, and that is set to finish. So this cliff that we are going to see has just been somewhat postponed, but hunger and food relief will never go away, and it is here for the long haul. And it's very, very scary. And we also know that women and older women are among a very high percentage of those that are in need. Yeah.
Right. Liz, I wanted to ask you about a community of women that really don't get enough attention and that we don't talk about enough, and that's women inside prisons and women who have just come out of prison. And I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about how COVID has impacted on the women that you work with in terms of things like, presumably in jails, family access visits have been stopped. And also I've heard from women who run refuges for women escaping domestic violence that in some cases the confinement that has been imposed by COVID can be triggering because it can be a reminder of coercive control.
Sure. Well, Carolyn, to begin with, before COVID, not a lot of women got visitors. Usually when the man is in jail, the woman is expected to travel to see the man no matter what. And she can travel long distances because not everybody is in prison close to their home. They're imprisoned wherever there's a bed available because we have so many prisoners in New South Wales. So women didn't really get a lot of visitors. So since COVID, it has forced Corrective Services New South Wales to come into the 21st century and start using technology. So where we were not allowed to ever bring a laptop into a prison, they're all over the place now. So they're all doing virtual visits via tablets. They're all able to do it via video link. Just as you would do a video link by zooming into a court, you can actually now video link your family. And so now more people are getting visits than ever. So that's been, yes, it's a great thing, but of course nothing replaces face-to-face. Of course, nothing. So people are getting visits. There hasn't been one case of COVID inside a jail, not one. The infection control that's been managed, how it's been managed with people transferring from jail to jail has been exemplary. So there hasn't been one case. So when you read these articles about, by some academics that are saying, well, please let them out, they're going to do this, I can tell you they're not worried about it at all.
Wow, that's very good news. But what
it is good news.
Generally then, in terms of resilience, what do you think keeps women strong when they are inside?
It's each other. What I'm concerned about, there's a transitional centre in New South Wales, and women, of course, what that means is that they are technically not prisoners. They're transitioning from the prison system out into the community, and they have employment on the outside, real work. So they're able to save for when they're released. They pay like rent to their bed and their board, and all that work has stopped. So since March, those women haven't had any work. They've just been isolated now within the transitional centre. Some of them are ready to come out. Some of them haven't even been able to get, well, they can't. They've stopped them from actually going to work. So people are working, you know, so, and I guess they were worried about them bringing COVID back into the transitional centre. So yeah, that's a real thing. That's a real concern, I guess. But are we setting these women up who should be transitioning? What have we put in place so that they do start to transition back into the real world, not into a managed and controlled environment? You know, so, or from a managed and controlled environment back into being, you know, self-reliant, you know, self-determining. So that has been a concern for me, that the transitional centre where the work has stopped, just stopped, not allowed to go anymore. So
when you and I were talking, you said to me that one of the things that does keep women's spirits up inside in terms of resilience was their kids, their
children. Absolutely. Their children. They want to be with their children. They want to know their children are safe. They are concerned when a woman, predominantly an Aboriginal woman and non-Aboriginal women, when they go to prison and there's no family to care for children, those children go into the care of the Department of Communities and Justice. So sometimes those women don't even know who their children are with, and they're concerned. And wouldn't you be concerned? I would be. So, and they're worried about that. So that keeps them worrying. And there is at one of the prisons, there is a service that brings the children to see their mothers. But some mothers also don't want their children to come to jail to see them. So, look, women have told me, you know, at the Remand Centre, at Silverwater Women's, there where they've had to do box visits, where they've been put in a box to talk to their children. They can't kiss them, they can't hug them. then they just said this, we don't want our children to see us like this. This is mothers and grandmothers. We don't want our children and our grandchildren to see us in a box like this. And I have to agree, I think, in that circumstances. So it is their children, it's each other, and it's the hope. But of course, if they had a house to come out to and a decent job, we all know that housing and work, we've seen people turned around when they've given proper accommodation and a proper job.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to come to that in a moment.
Oh, okay.
Bev, when you left home after being physically assaulted by your husband and you had 3 small children with you, that was back in 1987. Where did you go and what kind of help was available to you then?
I went then to what predated, which is now Centrelink. It was a government-run service. I was treated with dignity. I was not made stand in a queue and pointed to and had my name called out the way that people are treated in those institutions now. I was invited into an office. I told them my story. They said I could not go back to that again. I could not risk that. I left there with the deposit for rent for a house for me and my children, and my allowance, my parenting allowance, paid to me in advance so I could feed the kids. And when the electricity and the gas was to be connected, I was invited to come back and they would sign the paperwork for those things to be connected. I was treated with dignity. I was treated like I was a real human being. I was treated like my job of raising my children was an important aspect and needed to be recognised, nurtured and supported. I would hate to be a woman in my position today. I would be forced back into an arrangement in which I saw my own death in my ex-husband's eyes. He was not a happy man. I mean, bad for me. I'm not going to get into any kind of personality stuff, but I was in danger and I could not have my daughters see women treated in that way. I didn't want them to grow into thinking that was a normal way for women to be treated. And my society said, that's right, yes. And today, my society is saying, go back. It's your fault. Here, have a tiny amount of money, new start for goodness sake. Try and raise your children, look after them, and it's punishment, punishment, punishment. It's as if being a mother, being a carer, raising children and looking after the next generation so that they are able, resilient, capable people is simply not important. Anybody can do that, doesn't matter who it is. Mm-hmm. And on your issue with children going into care, I was appalled to discover that kids going into care are living in hotels with 5 or 6 carers, 8 carers a week. How do those kids bond? How do they know who's going to be there when they wake up in the morning? How can we have allowed our society to develop into something that cares so little about carers and children? Mm. And that's really what we are seeing. And we've seen it in this budget that gave nothing for women, nothing for childcare, nothing for women, nothing for older women, and nothing for the thing that you absolutely identified as being essential to all of it, and that's access to housing.
Yeah,
that is absolutely vital.
Well, I want to come to you, Elaine, now on this, because I'm going to compress your story a little bit because it is quite a long and complex story. But I think that many people would be surprised that it takes just a couple of missteps to end up without a roof over your head. So particularly if you're living, you know, the kind of freelance life of an artist, of a creative person, you were dealing with a family crisis in the UK, which you went back for, and you missed a couple of rent payments. And suddenly when you got back to Australia, you found yourself without a home. So can you tell us what you did next, where you ended up? Because I think that that's quite an important story for people to know.
The first 6 months of me being back here, and I have a son here, so I have family here, but that had all gone. Anyway, we won't go there. Fortunately, I have wonderful, wonderful friends So I arrived back, it wasn't as it planned. So various people, I stayed with them in the countryside, here, there, everywhere. So fortunately.
So you were basically couch surfing with friends.
Couch surfing,
and you were in your 60s.
Yeah, this was, yes, I'm 60, I'm going to be 66 in November, so I was 64. And finally, thank goodness, I was seeing a psychologist at the Black Dog Institute to support me through other things that were going on. And he said, wow, the first thing you need is a home. He put me in touch with an amazing organization called B Miles, named after B Miles. And they support women who are homeless or about to be homeless and who have had or experiencing mental health issues. And so in January 2019, I emailed them, and fortunately they got back to me. I went in to see them the next day, and they decided to take me into their program, which involved, first of all, going into a shared house. I mean, you could call it a refuge, and it's funny how labels can... That house was extraordinary. It was so clean. It was run like a well-oiled machine with a lot of love. And one of the, Caroline, you asked me the other day when we were talking something, did I feel ashamed? Well, I didn't feel ashamed because they made me feel, and no doubt all the other women, I get getting back to what you were saying, Bev, it was dignified. They never made me feel it was my fault. And actually being in that house, and it had its challenges with 6 women of different ages and backgrounds. And however, I suddenly felt more at home because I had a right to be there. Mm. So right then and there, that was my home. And obviously you had to adapt to rules, regulations, other people. However, that was better than, staying with other people. And then just briefly, what happens, I spent about 4 months there, and then they find you transitional housing, which I went into. And then finally, and they also helped me do, the paperwork to get on the housing list is, I can write, I can work a computer, but oh my God. So anyway, they supported me with that. And just before lockdown, so in March, literally 2 days before we were locked down, I moved into public housing, into the Northcote's Housing Commission in Surrey Hills. And it has completely and utterly transformed me in my life. Mm. 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 Of course. That is just so important. And it's still, so I've been here, about 6 months or something, and it's still dawning on me how, so now finally I'm now back to working on projects, etc. And I will also say that actually, yes, COVID, because of the JobKeeper being doubled, and I have a very cheap rent, but for the first time, I keep saying to people, I've been very financially relaxed. It's extraordinary. And now, of course, it's going down.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was so interesting about talking to you about resilience before this conversation, this public conversation, is that you said that you spent a year being homeless, but you never felt poor.
Yes. I was thinking about this whole thing of poverty and poorness, and I was actually looked up the definition last night, and I think the trouble with talking about someone being poor, it's also a label that's given to something that's substandard. you know, it was a poor computer because it didn't work properly. And I personally, fortunately, haven't felt like that. So then I was thinking about, perhaps because I was fortunate to grow up in a, you know, quite comfortable middle-class family, that somehow I certainly have had life skills somehow, you know, to cope.
You defined yourself through another narrative. Your narrative was that you were a creative person. You know, you were a homeless person, but that didn't diminish your creative spark. And so homelessness was just a set of circumstances, but it wasn't.
It did at times. I was, again, looking through my journal of being in that house and going through that whole process. And there were days where, oh, wow, because everything was so uncertain. And I think, and also in terms of the COVID lockdown, which everyone's had to deal with, it's like having to find new, not just routines, but new little daily rituals. And so one of the things I used to do, partly because I smoke, there was a little tiny park in Darlinghurst, and I used to go there every day. And that became a ritual of observing what was going on. And in the laneway, you would observe the underbelly of society, the people who were collecting cans and bottles in large laundry bags and loading up their bicycles, the piles of rubbish that would change over the day. So there was a whole sub-world. And I just started, for example, there was a beautiful frangipani tree outside. That was a daily ritual. I would go out every day and collect up a couple of fresh frangipanis, or, yes, just trying to find those rituals. And I think also that thing of making yourself feel at home. So I have this little, which I found on a beach in West Wales, which looks a bit like a boat to me with the masts. And that has travelled everywhere with me. And for some reason, just having that made me feel at home. So I realised that for people who are actually on the streets, that's why you see them, you know, surrounded with whatever bags of whatever, because they're just trying to create a sense of home and identity.
Yes, and you had that little boat with you as a sort of symbol of, you know, a kind of buoyancy, which I think your life really demonstrates. Ronnie, if I could come to you and just shift the conversation for a moment away from personal experience, really more you as an entrepreneur have to think about resilience in a different way, because you have to think about it not only for your clients, for the people that you deliver food to, but also the resilience of your business and your team. And how you do that is about getting involved and taking risks. And I'm just wondering whether you can talk about resilience in that sort of sense.
Absolutely. So I think having purpose and meaning is an incredible thread that I think we've heard, whether it was that image that Elaine just held up. You know, purpose and meaning are very defining and allow us to find strength. But there's no doubt, being an entrepreneur and keeping, I mean, I now have 200 staff, and managing 200 people through COVID, where people react differently through situations. Every single one has their own story. We all do. So there's no doubt that being an entrepreneur definitely demands a resilience and a focus, and the ability to have that end goal always ahead, and to know how to navigate what it is to get to that. Because even if I just look at OzHarvest, I mean, through COVID, most people just kept doing what they do. Even if it's other food rescue organizations, or food relief organizations, all they tried to do was deal with the people they had to deal with. We created about 20 new programs over and above the daily delivery of food to our organizations. We looked at what was needed and answered the impact, created the impact to answer the need. And so that's, I guess, where both resilience and entrepreneurship and taking risks. So we opened a second free supermarket, which is in Waterloo. And maybe, Elaine, it's not far from where you are, but it's open to anybody. We have free hamper hubs because these new people who didn't know how to get food or where to get food, so we put them in really visible places where you could just come and pick up beautiful, with dignity, everything with dignity and respect. We've got mobile markets out into regional Australia, to areas that have been affected by bushfires or different towns, making sure that good food is available to anyone who needs it. So yes, I think entrepreneurial spirit is embedded in me and therefore in my organization. And we have certainly managed to answer many new needs.
Just going to what we were talking about before with Elaine in terms of this sense of never feeling poor, I was just wondering whether you would share the story of the woman in the hijab who came into the supermarket, because it's one of the most beautiful stories in your book.
It is one of these really precious ones. So we have a free supermarket and I happen to be in it. I don't work there every day. I'm barely there, and it's manned by volunteers. So it's a very beautiful offering and space. And a woman walked in and she came up to me and she said, I just want to tell you that my husband just lost his job and that's why I'm here. And I said, stop. You don't actually have to tell us anything in this space. And she had 2 kids with her. And I said, let's go shopping, because the way we run the supermarket is a little bit like a personal shopping experience, so that we can really, one, have an interaction with the people who come in, but also answer their needs. And so if somebody thought they'd take 10 packets of pasta, but they're 2 people, we try and help them to make sure that there's enough pasta for everyone. Anyway, we started going shopping. And it was a week just shortly after Easter where there were pallets of beautifully boxed cookies and chocolates that had been given to us. And they really were, you know, the cream of the cream, beautiful quality. And as we got to that box, and what we do is we give the person a basket. The little boy grabbed his mother's hijab and said, Mama, I think this shop is too expensive for us. Oh. And I said, no, this is a very different kind of a shop. This is the kind of shop where you can have what you need. And we piled up their basket with the goodies, those beautiful cookies. We continued round to the end. And at the end of our supermarket, there isn't a register, there are no scales. There's a box that says every dollar allows OzHarvest to deliver 2 meals. And we took her products from her basket from our basket into hers. And then she opened her wallet and looked at the kids and said, guys, and she put $5 in the box and said, we've just allowed 10 more meals to be delivered to someone in need. And I think that's this beautiful notion of not feeling poor and having respect and dignity. And she taught her kids that what they were doing at that moment was really just receiving, and that giving is also just such an important part.
Absolutely. Liz, I know you've got another AGM, you've got a meeting to go to at midday, and so we can't run late. And I didn't want to let you go without a couple of things from you. You told me about a very interesting program for the women in the jail at Grafton around trauma, which I think is relevant to this conversation about resilience. And I was hoping that you could perhaps tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there's a new correctional centre at Grafton, the Clarence Correctional Centre. It's a $740 million facility. So we'll try and put that into context. There's a new bridge going over the Clarence River. So this jail could have built 3 of those new bridges. The contract is Serco, so it's a private prison. But what Glenn Scholes, the general manager, has done is Glenn has worked in corrective services for more than 30 years, and he's left the state system, and he's now the general manager of this private system. So it's, Carol, not just women, it's every prisoner that comes into Clarence Correctional Centre does a day of trauma-informed practice, understanding about trauma, how it affects people, the underlying sources of trauma. And so do all the officers, but they're not really called officers, correctional officers. They all wear name tags, their own name. They are people are not prisoners and they're not officers. They are called by name. So Glenn has done a complete flip of turned it on its head, the model that the state use. The state use a system where you have to earn rewards. You start with nothing and you earn rewards to be able to give privileges. Glenn gives you everything to begin with. And he has a mantra of you choose to lose. And if you choose to lose, I take these things away from you. So everybody gets a tablet. On that tablet, they can email, they can ring their family, they can watch television, they can do whatever they need to. They can book their programs, attend their training. So everybody in that jail, if you're an inmate or you work there, you all have an understanding about trauma.
Fantastic.
Carol, I want you to connect me with Liz after, because there's this beautiful program, a hospitality program that I'd love to put into prison where we teach people skills.
Ronnie, there is one there. There is one at Clarence Correctional Centre.
I figured there was one there, but what about all the others?
Well, I'm going to make sure, don't worry, I'm going to connect you all after this. Don't you worry, none of you will lose contact with
anyway, that answers your question. So well, yes,
trauma is Liz, there was also a story that I know you wanted to share, which you thought was illustrative of resilience. You mentioned a woman of, I think in her 50s, that you wanted to tell us about today.
Yes, look, I mean, it'll take a couple of minutes to read, but it'll just show you exactly the women, some of the women that are imprisoned across New South Wales that are older. And this particular woman, when I was doing my research, my research is around Aboriginal women with mental and cognitive disability in criminal justice systems. And I say systems because it's not one system. Police are a system, courts are a system, prisons are a system. So I say systems. So she had actually wrote me a letter so that I could understand. She was there to teach me so that I knew her story and I would learn. And she wrote me a letter about her life. And so she'd really thought about it. She knew that an Aboriginal researcher was coming and she wanted to talk to me, but she also wanted me to know. So she'd been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, clinical depression, anxiety, and Tourette's syndrome. No diagnosis of complex trauma, though. She was one of 11 children, Child Protection Services and police intervention as a child. She saw her father assaulted by police and arrested for traffic fines. Her brothers progressed into the prison system at an early age. She became a mother at 16 and again at 20. She was beaten senselessly, these are her words, from 17 years of age by her partner. She had an emotional breakdown and lost both children. She abused alcohol and other drugs to heal a broken heart. She was assaulted by police, but arrested for assault, police, and was still paying the fine. So she was assaulted, but she was arrested for assaulting and was still paying the fine, even in jail. She had another child at 37 and another at 39. She suffered mental, emotional, and physical abuse again from another partner. She lost both those children, again, abused alcohol and other drugs to dull the pain. And so began the revolving doors of prison life and the misery merry-go-round. She said that she was misunderstood as aggressive and angry instead of sad and lonely. She said she was a victim turned perpetrator. So she'd actually turned into a perpetrator of violence. She was fearful of getting close because she didn't want to be hurt or be rejected anymore. and she'd suffered quadruple doses of punishment from a partner, from police, from court, and now from prison. And she asked me, where is the rehabilitation back in the outside world? She wanted to stop prison from being that therapeutic option. But she remained hopeful that one day things might change for the better, so that her daughter and granddaughter would not have to live in fear, sorrow, and grief. So that was her story. And she was actually caring for another woman who had an intellectual disability while in prison.
I'm sorry to cut you off there, Liz, but we've got 10 minutes left and we've got an enormous amount that you know, we should try and at least touch on. But thank you very much for sharing that letter, which is really, really remarkable, especially the idea of a woman in that situation using the word hope. I want to throw a slight hand grenade into the conversation now. I do feel that the word resilience is being bandied around a lot as a kind of cure-all and as yet another thing that we all have to aspire to and we all have to be good at. So, Bev, I wanted to ask you whether you think resilience is being kind of sold to us in a way as yet another thing that we might fail at. And in a way, it's an excuse for a lack of adequate social policy to catch people in a net when they are vulnerable. I mean, if you put the onus on the individual and say, you've got to be resilient, then nobody else has to take responsibility for you, do they?
That has been my concern with the bandying about of the word resilience. Everybody wants you to be resilient. I look at my peers, I look at my sisters, and I realise that we are some of the most resilient people on the planet. This woman in jail is resilient. Elaine is resilient. Ronni is phenomenally resilient. We build resilience. We are resilience. We are a sex of resilience. We have survived from being told that our options were to get married, to being told and having to give up our jobs as soon as we got married, to having to now being told we have to work. We've seen the change of being marriage for life to being marriage not necessarily for life. We've had enormous changes in our lives. We've paid mortgages of 23%. And now are being told that, you know, we have to sell those things that we fought to hang on to pay for our old age. We are dealing with change and resilience all the time. It's not resilience that we need. It is decent policies that recognise the contribution of women, that recognise the fact that we hold up half the sky and that we contribute. Today, grandparents are looking after an enormous number of grandchildren. There was nothing in the budget to recognise that. There was nothing in the budget to increase childcare, to enable women to continue to work and support their families. There was nothing. They're talking about snap back. The back's broken. You cannot snap back onto New Start or No Start, as it should be called, because the cost of living, it doesn't matter how jolly resilient you are, if you've got $40 a day and you can't pay your rent and your food, you can be as resilient as all get out, but you haven't got the wherewithal to survive, the wherewithal to live. And it's really not about resilience, it's about policy taking feet off our necks and allowing us to do the things that we need to do. We've had a fabulous opportunity to do the housing, to actually reinvest in community housing. That's disappeared. That's not even going to be, not even on the agenda, even though every single organisation says it has to be. We have an opportunity to seriously look at the impact of New Start and who are the victims of unemployment. And we know that they are women over the age of 55, and we now know that that is growing to women over the age of 45. In your most productive years, you are unemployable. Why couldn't the policy should have been to have a look at what is the big picture here and how can we ensure the strength and the power and the dignity of all of our people? That could have been done on that budget. We've got the biggest deficit we've ever seen, and as far as I'm concerned, I won't use common language, but it's up against the wall. It is just a waste of time, effort and money, and we will be paying for this forever. I am really concerned about a push towards austerity and the whole language around resilience. I mean, we heard it when we were told that that women were going to benefit from the budget because they would be able to drive on the freeways. Well, that's some benefit to the poor woman who is living in her car and can't afford the jolly petrol to drive it to the shops, let alone on the freeway. I mean, we were told that, oh, why don't they just take out a mortgage? You try taking out a mortgage at 60 years old when you find out, you know, through circumstances beyond your control, you can't maintain your mortgage, you haven't got a job, your husband has lost his job and you're the only person there to look after it. I mean, it is absolute nonsense. These people are living in a bubble and they are destroying the underpinning fabric of our society. Women in our society are carers. And we did a cost of benefit analysis, and it's something like $39 billion in savings are made by women and their contributions that are not paid for. And that budget had an opportunity to identify those, recognise them, lower the retirement age for women back to 60. We know they're unemployed. We know there's no jobs for them. Why not? Why put them through this nonsense of New Start, applying for jobs that don't exist? This is a punitive society. It's not an engaging society. And as individuals, we are not punitive. We saw that in the bushfires. Look at the millions we put in our hands in our pockets and poured out to for those people. Look at the generosity that Ronnie is able to tap into as people care and give. We are not a punitive society, and we have a budget that is setting us up one against the other, old against young. Encouragement for younger people, yes, by all means, but at what cost? At the cost of elders. Our policy platform in this country stinks, and we need to do something seriously about it. And I look at Iceland, where they had that women's strike, and suddenly it's not a problem anymore. And maybe that militant part in me is saying, maybe it is time for all women everywhere to down tools and say, fix this or we're stopping.
And I know you think it's also time for a women's party. Thank you for that stirring rant. I knew we could count on you to elevate the conversation. And we're about to run out of time, but you know what you've said, obviously, Elaine embodies that sort of spirit of how if you ask for help, but you keep your dignity. Homelessness is obviously the great weight and the great burden on someone in terms of fulfilling their potential and releasing their energy so that they can lead a meaningful and purposeful life. Purpose being a keyword, I think, of yours, Ronnie. Ronnie, just to end on a slightly optimistic note, perhaps, I should just say we do have a lot of Q&A feedback, but most of it is comments, not questions. Just before I come to you, Ronnie, finally, one person, Sue Hayward, did want me to mention Dress for Success. I don't know how many of you know about Dress for Success. It's a charity. It's an organization that supports women who are coming out of prison with preparation for interviews by supplying them with a working wardrobe for interviews. And if they're successful in gaining employment, it gives you your first week's worth of clothing as well. So I just wanted to mention that. All of the rest of the Q&A content, we will try and post onto our Facebook page. But Ronnie, perhaps you could just mention to us, since housing is really at the nub of the entire discussion around resilience today, has come back to that one way or another. I gather that you may literally be cooking something up.
Well, it's so early days. My team will just laugh because they hear things that I haven't shared with anybody. We have been approached and there is potential to look at a new kind of housing, particularly for women. And so I love everything you've said, Bev, and I love what you've said, Elaine. We're still a long way from getting there, but I'm always optimistic. We do need to take your words, Beverly, Liz, Elaine, and learn and understand and hopefully watch the space potentially for a new kind of living for women, older women, that is filled with dignity and respect. But it's very early days, And as I say, my team are going to say, what the hell is she talking about?
You know how it works, Ronnie. You put it out there and
exactly. That's exactly what happens. The universe provides, and that's how everything happens.
And we can all look forward to, I'm expecting to see streets where there's an Oz Living yellow house with an Oz Living
yellow door.
Yellow van.
Yeah. Bright yellow somewhere, because that brightens up everybody's day.
Indeed it does. We have come to the end of our hour. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. Thank you to Ronnie, Liz, Elaine and Bev, and thank you for the feedback that you've posted on our Q&A page. If you are not a member of OWN, I think you can see that it might be an organisation that you might want to join. You can join us at ownnewsouthwales.org.au. And if you want to follow us on social media, you will find us in different moods on different platforms. So we are mostly outraged on Twitter, and we are mostly uplifted and inspired on Instagram. And of course, we really would like to hear from you on our Facebook page about what resilience means to you and any stories of resilience that you would like to share with us. I hope that you have a really wonderful day. Until next time, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.